Okay, good evening. Thanks everyone for being here. It's been well, it's only been about a week or so in between calls, but it probably, as Brian said, it feels like a couple of months. He's had as you can see, there's a bit of a change of scenery and a change of energy in the background as Brian's moved to a new space where he can connect with his with new surroundings and new inspirations and plenty of exciting things to come, which is all great. So we're back online, and the topic of tonight's talk is a ripper. It's a great topic for Brian to present, and it's all about the 18 origins and sources of thoughts. And for me personally, this is one part of the book where it brought a lot of things together for me, and I know that it's done the same for a lot of other people in terms of a lot of the acquired knowledge that we have from the different people we listen to and so forth out there in the space. And this topic brings it all together so that we can know exactly where these people are coming from when they're sharing what they're sharing, and also within our own world. So for those that aren't familiar, if you're watching this on a replay and this is the first time you've ever heard from Brian, basically this is a copy of his book, The Nature of Life. It's a 600-page textbook, and basically over 33 years of his life's work poured into a book. And a big part of what we're going to speak about tonight is presented within the book. So I'll pop a link in the chat box for those of you that haven't read the book yet. And yeah, can't wait for everyone to hear about this tonight. Listen with an open heart and head, and once you get your head around it, I'm sure this is going to clear up a lot of things for people out there listening tonight too. So Brian, welcome to your new space and welcome back online, and thanks for being with us, and looking forward to tonight.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks again for the great intro, and it's good to be back, and it's even better to be back in better surroundings. But more importantly, I have a special guest.
Woo,
everybody's been wondering, and my little mascot's back.
Yay.
So 3 cheers for Pedals.
Three.
So she's back here purring away on my lap. She's made a miraculous recovery. I just woke her up from sleeping, so she's not real happy. But she's back here on my lap and curled up in my dressing gown, so next to the heater. So it's a bit colder here in Montville. It's probably about 4 or 5 degrees colder, so we're adapting to that. So yeah, so it's been a great move, and it's even greater that Pedals is still here with us, even though she nearly fell off the balcony there the other day. So she's good. So somebody's already been asking in the chat how's she going, but she's back almost better than ever. She's still got a bit of recovering to do physically. So anyway, so it's been a pleasure to have her still in our life. Yeah, she's got 9 lives. I think she's already used up a few of them. So anyway, so I'm going to share with you what's probably been the biggest factor in my life personally, and this is where the importance of this topic that I'm about to cover is it can't be understated, and depends on how far we get into it, depends on how brutally honest I'll be towards a lot of what's being offered out there, but this is perhaps the most critically important topic, because everything we think, do, and say is based on our thoughts, obviously, if we're thinking it. So I've been doing this work for 35 years all around the world, and I've spoken to a lot of different people, and they all claim to have this empowerment, which is seated in their thoughts and the nature and origins of their thoughts. Yet when I ask them, when I inquire into it, they lack the conscious awareness of their thoughts. And again, I have a lot of people who want to talk to me and explain to me where they're coming from, and tell me about their experiences. But it's really challenging when you know that what they're saying is full of holes. Not that I'm saying I'm superior or anything like that, but anybody who's read the material can instantly tell exactly where a person's coming from, whether they're having an authentic experience or not. And really, you can actually read the nature and origins of their thoughts. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll have a bigger understanding of how that's even possible, right? So, so Mark, if you think I miss any points or I need to elaborate on anything, you know the material well enough. If I sort of skip something or don't explain it clearly enough, just let me know.
Sure, no worries.
But yeah, just to give you a background on how and why I came to be where I'm at. Not that that's anywhere special, like I said, but to be where I'm at with the understandings I have. Those of you that know, I had a series of head injuries before the age of 3. And the third one gave me a brain injury. And that left me with acquired savant syndrome and a lot of learning difficulties and, you know, like specific learning difficulties. And that limited me in a lot of things I could do. Like I had a speech impediment when I was a child. You know, I had a lot of extremely challenging health issues, you know, food intolerances, food allergies, and obviously vaccination damage. And, you know, on top of the probably just the standard Australian diet, none of that did me any good whatsoever. You know, I've got extremely good genetics, but I've got I had a very poor metabolism. And how that plays out in people's minds. You know, like I was talking to a lot of you know that I did an interview with Pete Evans there the other week, like Sunday. I don't even know when that was. It feels like such a long time ago. Was it just Sunday just gone, was it? Anyway, like when you talk to Pete, you know, he's got such clear blue eyes, and you know that his constitution and metabolism is very high, and it's very effective. So, you know, when you're talking to people like him, you can talk very straight. You can basically dish the chin out to them on the chin. You know, like it's part of iridology or iris diagnosis, that when you're talking to blue-eyed people, you can be very straight with them. But when you're talking to people that have got brown eyes or something like that, you have to be sort of more subtle and more gentle, you know, the non-violent communication type. And it's just how people, again, process information. And that information is based on the dominant forces playing out in their bodies. And that's reflecting in the nature and origins of their thoughts. And I'll go into this a little bit more later. So I had a very strong constitution, very strong genetics, which made my mind extremely powerful. But because it was being fed by all this crap food and, you know, things that I was allergic to, and I had a poor digestive system because I wasn't breastfed properly, and you know, I nearly died of gastro at 6 months, and, you know, I had a really bad start. So I had all these energies playing out, and it reflected in my mind. And on top of all that, with the head injury, where it hit me on the back of the head on the occipital lobe, it scattered my perceptions of time and space. So I remember going to bed when I was 3 years old, and all the lifetimes that I had were flashing through my mind. You know, like being born, dying, seeing past partners and relationships and things like that. And you know, I had full recall of how I died and everything like that in the last life. And like I even knew the name of my wife. And when I was in Europe, I almost went and tracked her down. I regret not having done that. And because I found out that she was alive when I was last there. And anyway, so like everything just sort of confirmed itself, as many people who have looked into reincarnation and things like that. But as you know, I have a very different spin on all that. You know, I think it's all more in terms of simultaneous lifetimes where everything is you in another form. But then when you look at it in terms of the evolution of consciousness and the play of consciousness, that's my next step. You know, everybody's got a next step into another life. And the more you understand the nature and origins of our thoughts, the more you're able to determine who you are in relation to yourself, and in terms of the person that you were born to be, and the person that you've been made to be. Right. So I talk about the dualistic and conscious paradigm. Society forces us to become somebody we're not. Like I call it being born in captivity in a zoo. And we build a compensatory personality around that. And as that compensatory personality breaks down, and I'm going to explain all this in future material, and how it leads to the different types and degrees of existential crisis. And if you look at how all that's playing out, again, I refer a lot to Richard Grannon's material, where he's talking about complex PTSD and having all the flashbacks. Like, very, very few people I've spoken to have got a real clear understanding on exactly what a thought is and where it comes from, and, you know, what determines what arises in our thoughts, and where they take us according to the different environments. Like I had one lady, for example, she was a cancer patient that I was treating, and she had such a bad vestibular system. At the time, I was living on a first floor of a building. She couldn't even look over the railing, right? And at the same time, she had an extreme phobia of dogs, right? So this is what I'm going to explain, how, you know, our thoughts are limited, and how that plays out to us believing things, which again limit us even further. All right, so going back to how I got started with all this. So my mind was like a deck of cards being shuffled non-stop. And I never had any sense of being present or grounded on earth. And that played itself out until I left school. And then in 1983, I left year 12. And I went about, my mission was to literally basically sort my head out. You know, I wanted to get my shit together, because I was basically suicidally depressed, you know, most of my life. The first thing I ever remember writing at the age of 3 was a suicide note. I mean, I couldn't write, but the only thing I knew was that game Hangman, and I was drawing the hangman as if it was me. I just wanted to hang myself and die, yeah. And so this is one of the main symptoms of a head injury, where, if you know homeopathics, the metabolism blows out and can't utilize sodium sulfate. Right, so that reflects mentally and emotionally. I go into detail of everything I talk about in my book, but I'm just going to summarize it and put it more into context of how it plays out in the day-to-day experience. All right, so like, I was tormented my whole life, and then I started exploring all the things like motor racing, martial arts, where it was all about self-mastery. And one particular day, I was practicing my race kart, and I was, before all that actually, I started reading everything to do with the power of positive thinking, and, you know, everything to do with the nature of the mind, self-hypnosis, all that sort of thing. And in a desperate attempt to calm down what was going on in my head, and because it was literally out of control. And I was doing all these extreme sports in an effort to try and control myself. Because I wanted to basically be, you know, cool, calm, and collected like all these heroes on TV, and I was far from that, extreme opposite. And it took me a long, long time to figure out how and why I was the way I was, and it's a puzzle that still continues to unfold today, in all honesty. And so I had a pretty good handle on all the mental, emotional stuff in theory. And, you know, I read a lot of books, despite the fact that I was severely dyslexic. And one particular day, I was practicing my race car, and knowing what I know now, I was severely dehydrated, probably sleep deprived, and blood glucose was probably, you know, blown out. It was probably too low. And I was going down a high-speed straight on my home track in Toowoomba, and there was a high-speed sweeper at the end of that track, at the end of the straight, and I lost concentration as I turned in, and that slight misjudgment caused the back wheel to nip the inside curb, and it just unsettled the car, and I went wide into what we call the marbles, where it just lost traction. And in the moment where I lost concentration, I felt the separation between my mind and body. And as I started to spin out of control, my thoughts all stopped like frames in a movie, the old film. And as I was thinking to myself, I just lost concentration. And I need to know what connects the mind and body in order to be able to master the physical, mental connection. And so even before I just sort of had spun out, And then I went off the track at full speed into a tire barrier. Thankfully, I wasn't hurt because I hit it at the right angle. So that was like a lot of people thought I was a perfectionist, but I was actually desperately seeking self-mastery. I wasn't competitive in anything I did. That really annoyed me, the competitiveness, all the ego, and that's what essentially caused me to give away motor racing. Dealing with other people's egos. In fact, what happened was I had a guy crash into me, went up in the air, came down and squashed my spine and broke my back. And like they're racing for sheep stations and like there was no prize money. So I got really annoyed with that. And even though I just updated all my cart and all my gear, I just sold up and left. So, you know, like it was just a passion. It was like in a lot of ways, I was trying to prove something to myself. Right. And what I'm saying is reflective of a lot of other people. Like I spoke to a guy today, and a lot of what I said is exactly what he's currently going through. And then I had another phone call from somebody the other day whose son is going through exactly the same as what I went through. So this is so common, but again, there's no conscious awareness of what's really going on. So, when I crashed the cart, I took that very seriously and personally because I didn't like making mistakes. You know, I always pushed the envelope and I was having crashes, but this was an accident. An accident was very different to a crash. And so I said to my martial arts instructor at the time, I told him exactly what happened, and I said to him, how do you connect the mind and body? You know, what helps me concentrate? And again, if you look at it, concentration is the mind. Right? It's the mind-body connection. And I wanted to know and understand how to concentrate the mind so it could coordinate with the body to have maximum performance. So he said to me, the answer was the breath. It's all about being aware of the breath. So from that instant, I instantly realized how important that the breath was in relation to connecting the mind and body. He just said it in the right way where the penny fully dropped. I fully got it. And from that moment, I was only 19, I haven't missed a breath. You know, like I took it to heart. I realized, oh my God, this is the answer to self-fulfillment and that sort of thing. So, what I initially did was I had a digital watch. I had I think it was a Casio, a Seiko digital watch. And I had it beeping every 5 minutes to catch myself if I was aware of the breath. And then as I got better, I changed it to every 10 minutes and then 15 minutes, then 20 minutes, and then every half hour. And then it was beeping on the hour. And then eventually I got hit by a car with it in my back pocket, and I went over the car and I didn't know I squashed it at the time, but I destroyed my watch. When I got home, I wasn't hurt because I was always doing stunt work. It was just another day, really. And I got home and my watch was destroyed, and I thought, okay, well, that's a sign that I don't need any external prompting now, because I build enough pathways internally to stay mindful of the breath. Right. So that's how I got started with this. And when I ask people how do they concentrate and all that sort of thing, they don't actually understand. A lot of people make a lot of big claims about their mental capacities and their ability to perform mentally, but there's no actual basis of it. Right. And this is where a lot of you know that I spent time with some Tibetan masters, and they were absolutely emphatic about the fact that if you're not consciously aware of the breath and the heartbeat, particularly the breath, then you're not literally in control of your mind. You're not present with the flow, right? You're either in the flow or you're doing mental gymnastics. It's literally one or the other. And all these subtle forces playing out within us, which then reflect in our mind, is what we're living within ourselves. And a lot of people I deal with on a daily basis as a practitioner, they find it extremely hard to live with themselves, right? And on top of that, like a lady I spoke to today, her life was extreme. Like, she's got a life and death situation happening. And on top of that, she's got extreme relationship issues, right? So not only are they struggling to maintain some sort of connection and awareness within themselves, they're being compromised, contradicted, and denied by the people that are closest to them. So this is what's feeding into people's stresses, yeah? So if we don't know how to turn all that around and make our own internal connection the dominant force, like I said in the blurb, you know, we're all just intelligent animals. We're not conscious spiritual beings present within ourselves and sharing the presence within each other. You know, we're all living as one. Yeah. So I'm going to go into a bit more detail, maybe a bit more than what I do in the book, just on a couple of points, because, you know, since I wrote the book, I wrote parts of that book like 20 years ago now, or even longer. So just having a chai. So that's what got me started. So when I started researching all the yoga, the Tai Chi, the Qigong, and everything else in relation to how it affected the mind, I had a pretty good handle on the nature of the mind and everything like that before I went to India. And I started doing all the exploration into the mind in 1983. And then I went to India. It was actually on the 1st of June, 1991. So it's just on, what's that, 29 years ago. So when I got to India, and the masters that had been connected with, even before I left, 2.5 years before I went to India, I met them in the flesh. Like I said, I didn't know they were living beings. I just thought they were spiritual beings, but they were living in the flesh. And that's when I spent time with them for 7 years between 91 and 98. And so when I got there, they said, look, you've done really well. And, you know, because they prompted me for 2.5 years, you know, in all the different dimensions that I was exploring with them. So they gave me a lot of firsthand teaching. But then what happened is that when I got to this particular ashram and I was told to sit down, shut up and be quiet, I was told, now that you've more or less mastered the breath, you have to master the heartbeat as well. And it's like, oh, okay. All right. So that was the next step. So this is everything I share in the Adada meditation. So how the inability to even determine what influences our mind is the big blind spot that most people on the earth have never ever stopped to consider, right? And this is where, again, like as many of you know, I talk to a lot of, you know, high caliber people, very renowned people, and I ask them, where do your thoughts come from, you know? And I say, don't think of a pink elephant, you know, don't think of a siren, don't think of a telephone ringing. They actually can't, and then most people can't, right? So we're all subjected to all the stimulation, but how we either react or respond, people can't determine whether they are, you know, controlling their reaction to something or whether it's a conscious response. And as many of you know, that, you know, I was heavily involved with martial arts. When I was exploring it all, I couldn't find an instructor who could explain to me what I'm now explaining to everybody tonight. It was like I was desperately in search of what I can now explain in like hopefully an hour and a half. So I quickly became aware of, once I started living with supernatural beings who weren't just living out theories and philosophies, but were speaking from direct awareness. And anybody who's met any of these masters know that they're speaking from direct awareness. And there's no ifs, buts, or maybes about it. Yeah. So when I realized that there was a conscious response from a state of being and like a state of consciousness and a level of consciousness, as opposed to somebody who's highly trained and highly skilled in martial arts or something, and had a very conscious and controlled reaction to something, it was completely different. And when I realized that there was the actual nature of that difference, that's when I went fully into what I'm now sharing in the book and on this call tonight, right? So again, I can't understate how important this is to everybody's relationships and you know, in their capacity to perform in any area of their life. Yeah. So so far so good, Mark. Like, is there any comments or questions so far?
No, very good introduction to it all.
All right. So like, I'm speaking directly from experience here. Like I've suffered more than most people I've met. You know, even though I deal with people who have had extreme crises and things like that, like my life was like a series of unfortunate events, you know. And equaling the suffering, I had the inspiration to sort of keep me going. That was up until I was 22. And then when I literally woke up to myself, you know, when I was suicidal, I had a gun to my head and I had a divine intervention. From that night on, like I literally woke up to the nature of it all, which is, you know, having fully surrendered or awakened to the fact that it's all divine. Then the whole paradigm shifts when you actually fully surrender or fully awaken to the nature of things. And like I said, I'm only in this position through grace, really. You know, like I'm here through no fault or effort of my own. It's literally where I've been guided to be. And this is where, you know, as somebody who's learnt the hard way, you know, you don't have to learn the hard way now. The opportunity to learn through inspiration and not suffering is here now. Yeah. So again, like what Sadhguru talks about, most people's suffering is a figment of their imagination, and their imagination's projecting their memories of the past into the future, right? And that's where most people's thoughts are at. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail of that as well. So it's so good to have Petals here with me, I tell you. So she's just curled up asleep now. So, so what I'll share with you is just an overview of what I share in the events. The screen sharing's been disabled there, Mark. So I'll just go through a bit of a PowerPoint. And again, there's a lot of people on the call who already know this material. And if there's something that you find extremely beneficial that I've shared with you in the past, and if I don't cover it, just jump in and say, Brian, you should explain this as well, because as you all know, I could talk about this for 2 weeks straight without drawing a breath. Yeah. So
should be good now.
Yep. Alrighty. Alrighty. So yeah, so we're going to cover the 18 origins of thoughts. This is, like I said, my favorite topic, and it's all covered in greater detail in my book. I'm just going to try and cover as much of the essence as I can tonight. And then that's the cover of my book. And remember, it's part of a series. It was supposed to be the first of 21. It's now the middle of 23 books. And there's a workbook as well. So that's the actual book itself. That's a 600-page textbook. It's in ebook version, a PDF, and that's $45. And the printed version is $210 plus $20 postage. So it's a massive, it's like the size of a telephone book. And the workbook is $27 as a PDF. It's an interactive PDF. So the reason why I do this is so you can actually monitor and track your own journey. And this is what I found very beneficial when I went back through all my journals when I was traveling. That's why I put together the workbook, because it helps you appreciate where you've come from and how much further you've got to go. So remember, even though I repeat this a lot, and the reason why I'm repeating it again tonight is because everything we talk about in terms of thoughts is, again, information-based. So all the information in the mind is based on what, when, how, where, why, and who. And this becomes very important when you look at the nature of it in terms of the outward-going thoughts and the types of thoughts, the inward-coming thoughts and outward-going thoughts. So I'll get into that further down the track. So when you look at how you can structure the information, you've got what in relation to how, you've got how in relation to who, and so on. So there's 30 pieces of information here. So you need 30 basic pieces of information to understand any one thing. But if you have 2 of these hexagrams here together, then you end up with 36 points. So you've got what in relation to what, when and how, when in relation to how, and so on. So there's 36 pieces of information to any basic understanding. So what I'm showing you here is exactly where everyone's missing the point, in the fact that they haven't learnt the nature and origins of their thoughts. They don't know what they're thinking. They don't know how they're thinking, right? And the main point that I like to share with, not that I'm saying this is special or different again, but the unique thing about what I'm sharing is, you know, like I've done a lot of workshops and I've seen a lot of people who do workshops and seminars, and it's trying to change people and what they think. It's not actually giving them any inspiration and a true knowledge of how to change what they think, right? So there's a difference between changing what you think and changing how you think in relation to the inward coming thoughts and outward going thoughts, right? So that to understand anything, to have a basic understanding, you need to know those 36 points in relation to something else, right? But then when you look at it in a greater detail, you got the internal, external factor as well. So you got the internal, external in relation to what, when, how, where, why, and who. And then that's in relation to something else, in relation to another external, internal, external, what, when, how, where, why, and who. So in this case, you might be talking about your internal breath, which is your what, and in relation to your internal thoughts of where your thoughts are coming from, which is where we're going to go. All right. So when you put it all together, there's essentially 144 pieces of information which your thoughts contain. Right. Every single thought you're having is made up of a continual string of these 144 pieces of information. Right. You might be thinking of your mum. So that's an external who in relation to her internal how. Like my mum's more or less on her deathbed, right? So I could think about my mum and internally how she's functioning in relation to where she is, which is in Toowoomba and so on, right? So every single piece of information that makes up a thought is made up of these 144 pieces, right? So it's very important to understand this is the building blocks of a thought. And if you don't realize that you're having an external influence, like the lady I spoke to today, her external environment was so compromising of her that she was having all the external outward going thoughts, right? So that's very important to understand. So when you look at your level of knowledge, you need to be able to piece together any combination or permutations of these 144 things. That's the depth of knowledge, right? You can have a basic understanding of something, a basic or a full understanding of something, which is all 144, but the depth of it is to how many combinations and permutations you can make, which are endlessly stringing together, right? That hopefully that made sense. You know, I'm doing these videos so people can go back over it and watch it and rewatch it to get their head and heart around the little details of what I said, right? So to give you an example of the combinations and permutations, the combinations is where I can put together any two of those 144 things, right? But a permutation is where I can put internal what in relation to internal what, in relation to external what, in relation to internal how, external how, in relation to internal, just constantly string it together so it's infinite, yeah? And this is essentially what your thoughts are doing. Right? If you look at the nature of your thoughts, it's an endless stream of information going through your mind. And what I'm emphasizing here is if you can pinpoint the actual the piece of information, if you just capture a thought, it'll give you a bit of an indication of where the imbalances are within your mind-body experience, so you know how to remedy it or self-correct it, which is more important, yeah? So when you look at it, if you have an understanding of all 144 pieces of information, that's your level of knowledge, right? But the depth of your knowledge is how much you can keep going on forever in relation to any one topic, right? So again, going back to the foundation of reality, you've got the 6 elements of life, which is experience, expression, evolution, form, function, and flow. And then you've got the 6 elements of existence, which are the opposites: interaction, reaction, regression, construct, dysfunction, malfunction, imbalance. So again, the nature of your thoughts, the ones on your left, that's the conscious paradigm. So you're having a true experience, a true expression, and you're evolving, and you're able to form your thoughts, you're functioning well, and you're able to maintain the flow. But on the other hand, if you're just existing like an animal in a zoo in society, you'll be interacting with people, trying to put on a brave face, You'll be controlling your reactions. You may be regressing because, you know, you're not doing things you know you should be doing, and you're not doing the thing. You can't stop doing the things you know you shouldn't be. And then you're constructing all these imaginings and memories in your mind, and that's causing dysfunction of the mind and malfunction of the external mechanical, and then that's leading to overall imbalance, right? So then you've got internal, external component of those. So I won't go into too much detail, but again, there's 144 components of each one of these. One's a conscious response, the other is a habitual reaction, right? So most people are stuck living in the dualistic paradigm, which is the ones on the right, the dualistic reality and the elements of suffering, right? What I'm sharing with you tonight is consciously being able to shift paradigms from the one on the right to the one on the left, right? One is just endless suffering. The other one's peace in the here and now, expanding into the infinite, the eternal, right? So in the, actually, I'll just skip over that one. So there's laws, dynamics, and processes. This is the most important thing when it comes to understanding the mind, right? This is not theory, this is not philosophy. There's actually laws that govern your mind. And there's dynamics that work within your body that reflects in your mind. And there's processes involved with healing the mind and processes in refining and developing your mental capacities as well. Right, so just to give you an example, if the law of gravity determines the dynamics of flight, then you have to know how to maintain lift, right? So that's the process. So if you've got all the laws going on in your body and in the external world, internally and externally, right, then you need to know the dynamics of how things work. So you know the process of either correcting an influence in your life to stop you having the wrong thoughts, or to bring in the positive influences to have the nature, nurture, nourish, to keep your thoughts growing and expanding in the right direction, right? So again, one of the most important things about understanding the mind and the nature and origins of your thoughts is that they're the barometer as to how your life's going and where it's going, right? If you have any way at all of knowing exactly where you're at within yourself and the way your life's going and the nature of how it's going and the future outcomes, then it's reflecting in your thoughts in the here and now. Yeah. So again, you've got the internal, external. So it's a hologram, again, that goes on forever. So you've got laws determining processes, which reflects in dynamics, which then determine the next level of the law, which determines the next process within a function and a flow, right? So again, it goes on forever. So you've got the top-down and bottom-up experience. This is really important for where we go into the actual nature and origins of thought soon. So there's top-down and bottom-up experiences of all thoughts, nearly all the thoughts, which I'll get to later, right? So top-down is where you're experiencing consciousness and experiencing the nature of reality. The bottom-up ones is where your mind's applied to a task where, you know, you might be threading a needle on a sewing machine or punching numbers into a calculator or working out the fuel economy of your vehicle. Right, they're all just bottom-up things, you know, working out when and how to pay a phone bill. You know, that's all bottom-up stuff, and that's all part of reality. That's all part of what life's all about, is being able to celebrate all those things. Yeah, but the top-down one is to give you an experience of being in the flow as you go about all the bottom-up things. Right, so you can have a divine top-down experience, but you can also have a divine bottom-up. It's not always dualistic in nature. Right, so when it's all one and whole and complete, that's when it's, you know, that's when you're experiencing oneness. All right, so what I was interested in when I started all this work is the capstone of the pyramid. It's all the higher knowledge within the levels of consciousness, right? That's what I was really seeking, and being brought up Catholic in a you know, modern Western society. There's very little true knowledge within the education system and the religious institutions and things like that. So again, we're like a tree. We need the top-down nourishment as well as the bottom-up. All right, so this is why it's important. The most important thing you can ever do is choose the company you keep. All right. So that reflects in your thoughts. So we're going to go into the 12 aspects. I've shared this in other videos, but just to give you a brief intro again, these 12 aspects, they incorporate every single influence in your reality. It doesn't matter how subtle or how gross, right? So if Mercury goes into retrograde, it's actually within your environmental one, right? And if somebody sprays Roundup next door and you get chemically poisoned, it's within the chemical aspect, right? So every single influence, positive and negative, is incorporated into these 12 things, right? And I'm talking about absolutely everything, going all the way back to the fact that, you know, if your great-grandfather or whatever went to the Boer War, you know, he may have had complex post-traumatic stress disorder. That may have neurologically impacted on him, which then mentally, emotionally impacted on his relationships. And that may have spiritually shut him down, which may cause you not to be able to find your purpose in your life today, right? So these are all part of the laws that play out, which I talk about in detail in the book. Right, so when you put them into a diagram, you end up with this dodic angle. And each aspect, you can put all 12 aspects within itself again. So in this case, you've got, this is the chemical aspect. So you've got chemicals in the environment, you've got chemicals in the food, right? So this adds the depth of understanding as to how all the influences are playing out. So these 12 aspects, each of the 12 aspects can be the cause of a disease as well as a form of treatment. Right? So if you have a physical trauma, right, imagine it's like a balloon. Any impact on that physical aspect will immediately affect either directly or indirectly every other aspect of being. Right? If you get chemically poisoned, the same thing. If you get a very bad biological infection or mental emotional stress, every aspect has immediate effect on everything else, right? So the flip side is if you have a physical injury and you go to a chiropractor, you get a physical adjustment, they can correct the flow of energy within and between all the aspects, right? If you get chemically poisoned, you may need to take a nutritional supplement, something like chlorella or wheatgrass or green barley to detox the chemical out of your blood, right? So to give you an example, if you have a physical trauma like I did, you end up with neurological damage, which then changes the biochemistry of your brain, which then changes the way you mentally and emotionally function, which either connects or disconnects you from your spiritual environment, which then impacts on your sociological aspect. And then as a sociological thing, you might end up comfort eating, and that blows out your diet and nutritional aspect, right? Which then further impacts on the biochemical aspect of your neurology. That shuts down your bioenergetic, bioelectrical, which then affects in your mental, emotional aspect, which then affects the psychological aspect. You know, so it just keeps on going forever, right? So that's basically how things are playing out in people's lives. So if somebody comes to me and they've been, you know, upset by something, you can literally wind the clock back and work out at what point that compromising decision burst their balloon. You know, I had one lady, she went to see somebody. There was a lot of drugs and alcohol where she went, and it blew her out. You know, she was all mentally and emotionally disturbed. So I wound the clock back and I said, "You overrode your intuition. You didn't want to go, did you?" And she said, "No." And I said, "What made you override your intuition?" "Well, I was tired and everything like that." "Why were you tired?" "Because I had a late night." "Why did you have a late night?" You know, so I wound it all the way back to when she realized that we're the most dominant force, where she lost the dominant force. So the more you know and understand how these influences work, the more you're able to consciously stay balanced. This is the balanced version of this model. The more you understand it, the easier it is to stay balanced, and you can make conscious choices when things come up, when things try to influence you. You can actually avoid it. You can nip it in the bud, right? So there's 12 aspects, and when you look at it mathematically, you need to address at least 9 of the 12 before you're more than 50% effective, right? And those of you that know me, like 80% of my clients are doctors, practitioners, therapists, and healers. And when you go through the whole diagram, you know, if I ask a chiropractor, "Do you work, you know, on the environmental in relation to the material?" They might say no. "Do you work on the sociological in relation to the mental emotional?" No. do you do with the bioelectric, bioenergetic in relation to the biochemical? They might say yes, right, if they know kinesiology. Right, so you can pinpoint exactly what each person is able to address, right? And when you do, most practitioners are only specializing in an area addressing one of the 144, sorry, there's 132 arrows connecting everything, right? So when you look at it, most people are only addressing like 7 of the arrows, right? Which is around about, say, 7% when I worked it out, right? So most practitioners are only addressing 7% of the overall picture. And this is why it's like pin the tail on the donkey or pinata as to whether a practitioner may or may not be able to help somebody, because they've got all these factors that they may or may not be considering, right? So when you address it, this is a typical, this is actually a diagram of the average person. Right, so instead of the dodecangle being balanced and having a central point, you've got all these arrows going away from the central point, not communicating within and between each other. Right, so each arrow that goes outside the model becomes a point of separation. That is where you have negative thoughts. Right, so when you actually look at it, each arrow where it leaves that aspect, it's negative. It goes into a like things speed up and intensify. It's a bit like a rock tumbling down a hill, right? It gathers momentum, right? And when they actually cross, it feeds into a false reality, right? And then when they split off further, you end up with all these divisions, right? So this is where, when you look at the behavior of all the police and all the brutality, right, they're so divided within their thoughts, right? They think they've got every right to bludgeon someone with a baton, right? That's all part of the separation and division. It's all the indoctrination and programming. And I want everybody to understand as well, nearly everybody in a position of authority is either a psychopath or is possessed by an entity, right? Or both, right? And it's not their fault. You know, it's just all their energies are collapsing into the disease state, right? And that's just because they were traumatized at some point in their life, either deliberately if they were born into the Illuminati and so on, or just as a product of society, right? Which is what most people have been severely traumatized. Now, Dr. Joe Mashala, he scaled all this, and most people are experiencing PTSD, right? So that's why it's like what my colleague in England says. You know, he says it's like Tony Wright. He says it's like explaining dementia to the demented. When people are in this disease state, they go, "Oh yeah, that's a nice theory and philosophy, Brian, but I'm too busy or too sick to try and understand it." Right? So they're actually at the point where they can't even help themselves. And again, when you look at it, that's a construct. You know, as I said before about form and construct being opposite. They've constructed all these beliefs that keep them limited, and they can't stop and think of it. They literally can't stop and think of an alternative way of thinking. Right? So the separations and divisions just keep feeding into each other. And people look for the easy way out instead of the natural path of least resistance. Right? So just quickly going to the dynamics of disease, all disease starts with a deficiency. Then it creates an excess, which then feeds into a deficit, which then creates an overload, which then creates a depletion, which then causes a collapse, and that collapse ends in death, right? Along the way, we compensate, we overcompensate, and then we turn self-destructive, right? And this is where a lot of people are at. If you look at the subtleties of it, people who are smoking, drinking, you know, they're doing all these things and they go, yeah, I know it's not good for me, but, you know, you've got to have some vices, you know. It's actually socially acceptable suicide when you look at it, right? I have a lot of people who want to debate and argue with me about alcohol, and what do they call it? The devil's juice. They call the top-end alcoholic beverages spirits for a reason. They attract negative entities, right? And this is where a lot of people want to argue with me about everything in moderation. It's nothing to do with it. That's what the Illuminati want you to believe, right? If you keep believing that, you will never, ever gain control of your thoughts, right? This is why it's purity all or nothing, right? So if you have somebody who's wanting to, hold on to their little comfort thing of having a glass of wine every day, I say to them, would you give that to a toddler? And they go, well, no. It's like, well, why not? It's because, well, their brain's developing. I said, you've been brainwashed in your thinking that the neurons in your brain are any different to a toddler's or an infant's, right? It's not true. Your neurons are equally as sensitive, right? And when we're taught to compromise, contradict, and deny away from the purity of things, it immediately affects our thinking. It immediately limits our capacity to think and find alternative ways of living and being, right? And that's within ourselves. And then that, when we end up clashing with others, that just feeds into more conflict and confusion, and it just spirals out of control, right? So the opposite to that is the dynamics of growth. Everything starts with true knowledge. That helps keep everything balanced. That helps us diversify our experience and celebrate life. Then that adds to the synergy, which then enables us to purify, which is selflessness. So we become more and more selfless when we're open to guidance, and that guidance leads us towards immortality, right? So along the way, we develop our skills, our talents, our gifts, and we fulfill our passions, which is just, what I call the common passion, right? Those of you that know the material will have more of an understanding of this. So as we go about healing, we can get all 132 arrows back on the dodic angle, but we may have still the odd stray energy where it's going outwards, right? So this is where people are thinking holistically, but they're still having the odd stray thought, and they might get, if they get sleep deprived or get dehydrated, they might get, the people get hungry, they get hangry, they get angry when they get hungry, that sort of thing. So just to give you an idea, this is what I explain to everybody, right? Who are you when you're tired, right? When you're sleep deprived? Who are you when you're thirsty, when you're really thirsty, right? Who are you when you're really hungry, right? Who are you when you're tired, sleepy, and hungry, right? And thirsty on a hot day, right? So this is where everybody's personality is changing. But again, the basis of what's changing is the nature and origins of your thoughts, right? So these influences, when they are not balanced and they start to go out of balance, they immediately affect your thoughts, right? So if you're hungry and your diet, and hungry and thirsty, and your diet and nutrition goes out, it's immediately going to affect your mental and emotional state, right? If it's extremely hot and humid and you don't like the heat, it's going to reflect mentally and emotionally, right? I personally don't like the cold at all, right? So the temperature's dropped about 4 or 5 degrees, like I was saying earlier. And like I'm really struggling with we've just got all this cold air coming up from the south. And I'm really struggling with that, right? So I have to keep on top of my breathing to keep my mind from contracting into my body too much. I need to stay connected to other realms, yeah? So this is where you have to be aware of the subtle things. Like I have a saying, the subtle things are the most powerful, right? The more and more you get balanced within this whole model, the more you'll be tuned into the subtle things. And the subtle things will reflect in the nature and origins of your thoughts, right? So the most important things, we're just going back to the dodic angle, we're just going to have a quick look at this, the biochemical aspect, right? So the biochemical aspect is made up of the lymph, the blood, and the nerves, right? So you've got all the neurons and everything, the neurotransmitters within the brain and so on. So these are the 6 levels of communication. If I stick a pin in your toe, your whole body jumps, right? And every cell either directly or indirectly communicates and coordinates with every other cell. So the reason why this is important is because you need to understand exactly how most of your thoughts are occurring, which is what I'm going to cover next. So when your lymph, can you hear Petals purring away here? She's got a really loud purr for such a little kitten. So when your lymph is disturbed by what you eat, particularly by your breathing, remember the diaphragm is what pumps the lymphatic system, and that's associated with your breathing. The heart's pumping the blood. So this goes back to what I was talking about within the Adata meditation, the lymph and the blood. And they're predominantly affected by what you eat. right, which is what we're going to cover soon. And then the lymph and the blood determines the quality of your nerves and whether you're in the sympathetic, parasympathetic state or whether you're beyond duality. And that if you're beyond duality, that's when your bioelectrics, bioenergetics, and the quantum aspect fire up, right? So this is very important to understand if you're wanting to get mental peace and clarity, right? You cannot do it unless you're actually living a pure life, pure diet, pure company, pure lifestyle, right? So if your lymph and blood in any way are toxic, then there's actually 32, right? So you've got the quantum aspect of your lymph, you've got the bioenergetics of your nerves and so on, right? So there's actually 36 levels of communication when I stick a pin in your toe that's communicating through every cell of your body, right? So your lymph goes through, slowly, your blood's faster, your nerves system's very fast, the bioelectric and bioenergetics are almost instant, and the quantum is actually before it happens, right? Which I talk about within the communication within time and space, right? So again, it's just information. The reason why these 6 levels of communication, or the 36 levels of communication, is so important is that is exactly how the information is communicating within your body, which reflects as a thought, right? If you're not aware of how the lymph, blood, nerves, meridians, and the chakra and the quantum level is reflecting in your thoughts, then you won't honor the need to maintain not just balance, but to maintain their ongoing purification, right? So, so we're going to now just go, because the topic for tonight is the 18 origins and sources of thoughts, which is all part of the mental emotional aspect. Like I said, this is one of my favorite topics, but I want to do these videos so I don't have to keep talking about it, and I can develop and share all the new material that goes well beyond all this, yeah? So this is the element of you are what you think, right? And I'm going to be, like I said earlier, depending on how I go with it, I might get brutally honest with this. And other than and again, I don't want to harp on about this, but other than the 9 masters I spent time with, nobody's really aware of the nature and origins of their thoughts. And like, I'm not going to name anybody in particular, but there's a whole group of spiritual gurus and teachers out there. And I've watched it and I've researched it and looked into it specifically to find what they believe is the nature and origins of thoughts. And their answers are, to be honest, completely dismal. Yeah. I'm going to probably do an actual video on this, just so once people have had time to digest what I'm sharing, they themselves can watch the videos and go, oh my God, that person's world famous, but they're absolutely clueless on what he's talking about, right? And this is where, through their own admission, that they've actually not been able to reveal the true nature and origins of their thoughts. Right? The one person I do recommend that has got a really good handle on it is Sadhguru, right? Out of everybody that's out there at the moment, Sadhguru is the one that I know is consciously aware of this, even though he may not be able to articulate it as clearly as what I do. But I know that he's, just from what I've seen him say and what he does, I know that he's aware of this, right? But I don't know anybody else who is. And part of the reason why I know that is because if they did know, they would be communicating the essence of what they would be communicating would be completely different, right? It would be so different. And the laws that they would be communicating would be completely different as well, right? So this is why I said, if you can't do this correct, then, do the 6 with your finger and the circle with your foot, if you can't self-correct that, then it's going to reflect in the nature and origins of your thoughts, right? You won't be able to correct yourself. Like I was talking to a lady today, again, in a life and death situation. She said, I'm fine, but when I get triggered by the people around me, it's like the horse just bolts and I can't get it back. I said, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? You need to be able to nip these things in the bud so it doesn't get the better of you, right? So, so you are what you think, right? So this is the one of the most important things that everybody agrees, you are what you eat, you are what you are what you think while you eat. That's one of my favorite sayings, right? So no one actually knows what a thought is, where it comes from, and so on. That's my major point, right? So, but what is a thought and where do they come from? It may or may not surprise you, but like in the 35 years I've been asking people this, not one person that I've sat down and talked to and actually more or less interrogated it a lot of times has had any real clue, right? And everybody, like Mark was saying earlier, once you get your head and heart around this, it's so obvious, right? And this is where, at the end of a weekend event where I share all this in greater detail, I ask people, like, hands up if you would have ever come to this realization or this understanding through your own means. And everybody goes, not in a million years, right? And I've done it with a group of people recently. I mean, how many people do get the opportunity to stop and think? And if they do stop, they can't think because they've got too many energies running, because all their energies in their dodic angles going every which way but loose, yeah? So these are the 18 origins of thoughts. And I'll go into more detail with those, right? So you've got chemical poisonings, biological infections, negative energies or entities, and these are entity forces. So you've got negative energies, which are problems within your chakras and so on, and you've got entities as well, which is what I was saying about, we call them NEFs, negative entity forces, or negative energy forces. Right, so negative energy forces, like if you say to yourself when you're a child and you get in trouble, oh, I'm hopeless at this, I'm never going to be able to do this, then that's an energy that's like locked into your energies, which creates a belief system, right? So a lot of the time I'm dealing with negative energy forces in people where they formed a false belief around what they can and can't do. But that might have just been, like I said, if I took it personally and I thought, okay, well, I can't even drive a race car because I just crashed and nearly killed myself. If I was really blown out, if my blood glucose was really low, I might have got all defeated and upset by that, right? But instead, it pushed me into this whole exploration, right? So some people can pull themselves out of a setback like that, and some people can't, right? And that's depending, again, on their constitution and metabolism, according to what's going on at the time. Right? I speak to a group of people, like a family, all 6 of them are in a car accident, their mother gets killed, the 6 children survive, one child is traumatized by the whole thing, the other 5 kids get on with their life. I'm interested in, why did that one kid get traumatized and end up having to go on to medication and everything? And why were the other ones perfectly all right after it and were able to get themselves together again? That's the thing that fascinated me when I started all this. Yeah. So what makes a person construct a belief about something, right? So then you've got the cellular memory, programmed associations, mind reading, projected thoughts, psychic impressions, imaginings, subliminal frequencies, morphic resonance, the energies of the air, foods and fluids that you consume, your intuitions, inspirations, soul connections, spiritual guidance, and divine oneness. Right, so the way I explain this is, when you know how to meditate in the way that I share with you, which is the Adada meditation, the ability to go into the stillness, emptiness, and silence, using the breath, right, holding the breath out, waiting for the breath to come in. That's the basis of stillness. Yeah. If you don't know that, then you will not be able to stop and think, right? But when you find the stillness within the breath, the thoughts are shown to you, they're revealed to you, right? So as you're going inwards to the breath, you're seeing all the energy that's trying to go out in its expression, right? The best time to explore this is when you sit and eat. Just try sitting and eating and stay aware of every breath, every phase of every breath, and see how challenging that is. And as you're going inwards on the breath, you'll have all these thoughts distracting you or wanting to take your energies everywhere else other than just be present with what you're doing, which is eating the food, where you're merging with that food, right? Like I say, if you only ever ate carrots, at what point are you a carrot eating a carrot, right? So when you're in the high vibrational state, the highest you can obtain, and you're eating the highest vibrational food, then that's when those energies come together. So it's you are what you eat, you are what you think while you eat. Right? But if you're sitting there watching smut on TV, eating microwaved food with alcohol and bad company, your energies implode, right? So the idea is to find the highest, purest state that you can, eat the highest, purest food, vibrational food you can, and the coming together of that is what determines your capacity to grow and heal and grow, right? So, yeah, so they're the 18 origins of thoughts. And so when you look at them, what I was saying before about the lymph, blood, nerves, meridian, and quantum level, right? When I went to India, and I can't go into the depths of all this tonight because it would take me too long. This is what I do in my events. But when I went to India and I was told to sit down, shut up and be quiet, and I was meditating, like I said, I went into the breath, and then I went into the heartbeat, and then beyond the heartbeat, you've got the cellular level. And when your consciousness goes beyond time and space to the point of there's stillness, emptiness, and silence. You've got stillness within and beyond time, and you've got emptiness within and beyond space. And you've got internal, external silence, which is the result of internal and external stillness and emptiness. Right? So when you know how to do that using your data meditation techniques that I share, you actually become the point of awareness, which is observing everything in the universe, everything within consciousness. So when my consciousness went back to source, I was able to watch the cells of my body replicating from the inside, right? So what I was watching was the interphase part where the cell was starting to grow, and then you get to the point at the telophase where the cell starts to split, and then at the cytokinesis stage, when it separates, just at that point of separation, the bioenergetic quantum level of the information from the mother cell transferred into the daughter cells, and I was able to see how that was reflecting as a thought, right? And this, like I said, the subtle things are the most powerful things, right? So the most ridiculous thing that I have people believe, that people believe, is that the mind is seated in the brain. It has absolutely nothing to do with it. That's why I said, if I stick a pin in your toe, every cell communicates directly or indirectly with every other cell. So every cell is communicating its state of being to every other cell, either through the lymph, blood, nerves, meridians, and chakras, or the quantum level, right? So just in terms of clarifying the bioelectrical, bioenergetic, if I have an electrical cable, that's bioelectric, right? But the magnetic bioenergetic field around that is also communicating information as well. This is where free energy comes from, with the flux within that, within the energy fields coming together, right? So when you look at it, the transference of the cells, the energy, the information at all the different stages of the cellular replication, that's reflecting in the quality and the nature of your thoughts. If your cells are extremely disturbed by a chemical or a heavy metal, the quality of the information being transferred within a cell at each stage, and then transferred between the cells at this point of separation at the telophase, that it causes the dualistic outward going thoughts, right? Which is what we're going to get into. So this is the basis of, when you go back a slide, right? This is primarily, it's the fourth one, which is your cellular memory and your programmed associations. This is how the information's being shared. Right, so this is where, if you go into all the circadian rhythms and things like that, the traditional medicines like Ayurveda and Chinese medicine talk about, the different cycles of the day, you know, you can actually determine what you're going to be thinking at 1 to 2 tomorrow afternoon if you know how this works, right? Why is it that we don't know what we're going to be thinking at 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, right? It's just actually quite crazy when we don't understand how the mind is meant to be a tool, right? And how it works and how we can use it, right? So when you go into the subtleties of it, again, which is what I explain in all the data meditation and all the advanced workshops, it's very obvious how this plays out, right? If you know how to interpret it, right? So when you look at the most important topic, is there's 2 types of thoughts, right? There's inward coming thoughts. They are unifying in nature, and there's outward going thoughts, which are dualistic in nature, right? I was saying the dodic angle, when they separate and go away, that's dualistic. Soon as it separates, soon as it starts to get disturbed and separates, that's dualistic outward going thoughts. When they actually, all the energy that's going outward starts to turn around and find its way back to the center, then that's unifying in nature, right? That's when things start to come together, right? I was speaking to another person today, and she was experiencing all these synchronicities and serendipities just today. And everything I said, she goes, oh my God, that person just offered me this. And oh my God, I just found that today. So at least 4 of the things that I said were key to her state, she had just connected with that day. And I was just confirming it and taking it to the next step for her, right? So this is where this is all playing out at the different stages of healing and the levels of healing, which I talk about in the other workshops as well, just for those who know, yeah? So they're the 2 types of thoughts. So the more you're inwardly focused on the breath and then the heartbeat and then the cells, and beyond that, you've got the atomic level, then the subatomic level, and then you go back to divine level, right? I'm not sure whether I'll get too much into that tonight. But as you're going inwards to the divine, you'll identify, that's what I was going to say earlier, you'll be able to identify the nature and origins of those thoughts, right? So imagine if you're in the middle of an intersection and there's 18 different roads going off to all different directions. If you find that stillness, emptiness, and silence within yourself, and you maintain that state through the breath and the heartbeat and so on, then as you're going inwards, which is going down and in, and as you do that, you go into the up and out experience as well, where you're expanding your conscious awareness, right? As you're expanding, you'll be able to identify, it's like, again, if you're standing in the middle of an intersection, you'll be able to identify whether it's a bicycle, moped, motorbike, a rickshaw, or a truck, or a bus, or whatever's coming in each direction. So as it's coming to you, right? So as you go down, you're staying more and more still, empty, and silent, and you can see the energies as they pass, right? And you know that that's actually not you, right? You know that you're connecting to the essence within the stillness, emptiness, and silence, right? So the more you go inwards, the more you're aware of the subtleties of the energies that are playing outwards, right? Again, I go into detail within all this in the Adata meditation. So dualistic outward-going thoughts that usually occur in the form of doubts, judgments, and questions, right? So this is where, if you do something and you get a parking ticket, you might go, oh, what the fuck? You're asking a question, yeah? So you see what I mean? It's very subtle, but it's very powerful at the same time, right? So all outward-going thoughts are essentially a question, right? The what, when, how, where, why, and who, right? So if you get a parking ticket, if you look into it, which is I'm going to go into shortly, the nature and origins of that thought, when you're projecting that energy outwards, who are you actually talking to? Yeah. Why? Why are you finding it necessary to actually even say or do that? Yeah. So the doubt, judgments, questions, when directed at any form in life, leads to emotions and sufferings, which result in guilt, shame, and blame. And this is all the projected energies that's going on. And when you transcend the whole dualities and fully beyond surrendering and fully awaken the nature of this, Swami Chinmayananda, one of the great saints of Kerala in South India, he said there's a painting questioning the painter. So you're living beyond the masters I spent time with. They said you have to get to the point where you're anchored in the stillness, emptiness, and silence, to the point where you're free of all self-doubt, all judgment of others, and all question of the divine. Right? So it's a bit like when you're hammering something and you hit in the thumb and just like, let go of all these expletives. It was like, well, why is that necessary? Where did we actually learn that behavior? Right? And that's what needs to change. But most people can't. So the unifying inward flowing thoughts, they give a sense of knowing the divine elements at work. So this is the divine will, the divine time, the divine order, the pace of grace. This is what I talk about in the other events and the other videos. Within each moment, they provide the experience. So we're back to experience, expression, evolution, form, function, and flow. So they provide the experience of the divine nature and the feeling of the divine qualities. So the divine qualities are all the absolute feelings. Like there's no degrees of peace. There's no degrees of love, right? They're all or nothing. But there's degrees of sadness and anger and so on. And I normally share stories at this point, but I won't do that tonight. So these are the 18 origins of thoughts. So when you categorize the 18 origins of thoughts into the outward going thoughts and the inward coming thoughts, there's a positive, negative, and divine nature of them, right? So the first three are only dualistic and negative in their nature, right? If you get chemically poisoned, even if you're on antidepressants, it's having an extremely negative impact on your overall dodec angle. Like I was talking to somebody today who's just started taking antidepressants, and I know that that's going to be a challenge for when I start doing the neurological work on them, because it blocks development of new pathways, right? So we're going to have to try to ease them off that as quickly as possible. Yeah. So the chemical poisoning, everything's appropriate when it's appropriate, right? So obviously they're taking antidepressants as an intervention because they can no longer control their mind, right? And then the biological infections, right? This is where I talk about it in great length in the events and the book, where, like I treat all the rapists, the murderers, the pedophiles, the child molesters, all those people and their victims. And most of those perversions are due to biological infections. They may have traveled to Bali 20 years ago, picked up Bali belly, they've been craving pork ever since, and they've got this porn addiction, right? And, I could tell you a million stories about the people I've treated who have been busted for drugging people and raping them. And when they come to see me, it was like, well, you've got a bug in your gut. And they go, well, yeah, I've never been, like they say, yeah, I was never the same after I got sick in Bali 20 years ago. Yeah. So they don't understand how a biological infection is perverting and completely changing their sexuality. Right. And this is where the chemical poisonings, this is obviously very controversial, as with everything I talk about. The chemical poisonings, when you look at how the two people who presented the documentary called Toxic Baby, I can't quite think of their names, but been a long day again. But they explain how chemicals reverse gender, all this gender confusion at the moment. And I share the documentary Toxic Baby and the professor who co-produced that. And not one person's ever come back to me with anything intelligent. No one's ever come back to me at all. But if they did, you can't actually dispute the impact of how chemicals are creating all this gender dysmorphia. Yeah. So their chemical poisonings affect every single pathway, every single lymph, blood, nerve, meridian, chakra, quantum level impacts on that dramatically. So remember, this is all impacting on the levels of communication. And the levels of communication are then, so the 12 aspects are impacting on the levels of communication, which then are reflecting as your thoughts, right? So if you have a glass of alcohol, then you're going to be full of negative entities and you will not be able to think for yourself. Anybody who drinks coffee, any caffeine, any nicotine, or has alcohol cannot think for themselves. They are just a host of whatever negative energies are playing out. Yeah. Again, there's no degrees of purity. That's one of the divine qualities is purity. There's no degrees of it. And it's like I say, well, would you give any of that to a newborn baby? And they go, well, hell no. Well, why not? Yeah, it's supposed to be pure. And they've got all these discrepancies and all these desensitizations in their system where they think it's okay, somehow justified. Yeah. So the cellular memory and the programmed associations, I showed you the basis of that, which is the cellular memories within the cell and the programmed associations are between, say, cells and organs, right? So, what's your association around swimming pools? If you had a near drowning experience, well, then you won't have a good one, right? So it's a learnt thing, right? Mind reading, I won't go too much into these because the chart, I meant to attach the chart to the email that I sent out so everyone can watch the last one, but it's on Facebook and MeWe now, so you can just download it and have a read of it. Mind reading, that's where, if you're close to somebody, you'll say something and somebody would say, oh my God, I was just thinking about that, right? So you can either do that consciously or randomly. I can do it consciously. So then projected thoughts, you can, I have people and friends who, consciously project thoughts at me to try and get me to do things, And I had one person close to me about 20 years ago, and we could do that flawlessly. We were so powerful. It was so powerful that we could do that together. And psychic impressions. This is where, like I say, I've been doing this since 1983, and I haven't met anybody who hasn't had a psychic impression, an intuition, or some form of precognition, right? So there's pathways exist in nearly everybody. But as I talk about in the other events, it's how to tap into the intuitive process. That's your foot in the door to higher consciousness, right? So, so you've got subliminal frequencies and programmings, which is what's happening with all the 5G and all the TV frequencies and radio frequencies. The Morphic Resonance, which is best explained by Rupert Sheldrake. The energies and properties of the air, food, fluids, and I go into great detail in that in my future book. The intuitions I've talked about in the past and inspirations. Then you've got the soul connection, spiritual guidance, and the divine oneness, right? So this is the process. And remember I said there's laws, dynamics, and processes. The process involved with going through to the highest state of consciousness within this is first of all, you've got to purify everything out of your system. So you get rid of the first three altogether. And then you have to continue the purification and energization of the body. So you go from the negative to the positive of the green ones in the middle, right? And then once you get the dominant force as the positive within the green ones, then it gives you the opportunity to start to connect with your intuitionist. And then your intuition helps you guide fully out of the dualities of the green ones and fully into the number 13 to 17, right? So when you're actually able to stay connected to all the inward coming thoughts, that's when you're in the flow, right? And then once all that guidance, again, it's all the information that's coming in as those thoughts, that information guides you towards your potential. Then that your potential to connect with the divine, that's where you experience yourself as, you know, all beings in all worlds, in all universes, right? So this is what I was talking about before. You got the breath, the heartbeat, the cells in your body. You experience yourself as the divine expressing itself. Remember, experience, expression, evolution, form, function, and flow. All of that is the divine expressing itself. So your consciousness has returned to the actual source, right? So once you actually stay in that state, and then you're still in this dualistic world here on earth, then what happens is, because you can consciously maintain the stillness, emptiness, and silence with every breath, heartbeat, cell replication, then what happens is you then have the divine inward coming thoughts well, they're not really inward coming thoughts, but they're given to you in the green ones, right? So once you go beyond time and space and you go into the oneness, the information flowing between time and space actually stops. There's very few people at this point, right? So there's no longer communication between your future higher self. There's no longer the point where you realize that all your spiritual guides and everything is you in another form. And then all the information stops. That just leaves you in the here and now to be and do what you're here to do, where you're not needing any guidance or input just to help you become you. You're actually being all that you can be, and you're here to do all these things that you're here to do. So as you go into that process, that stage of the process, you're literally living on the leading edge of consciousness, expanding into the unknown, and then your thoughts are given to you in the moment as the green ones from the divine itself, right? Again, very few people fully understand that. So you become the source of the breath, you become the source of the heartbeat, this intelligence within the cells. That's all playing itself out, and you can see the dance between the origins of these cells, right? So the way I explain it is that the various thoughts are different bandwidths and frequencies of communication within and between the cells of the body, right? And the more pure, the higher the frequency, the vibration. So imagine if you've got all these 18 thoughts, and the more you go from the gross dualistic thoughts to the purity of the highest vibrational thoughts, the more you connect with the oneness of the whole thing. It takes you back into the whole thing. So you may still have these energies dualistic, but the dominant force keeps you connected to this. This is just background noise. And this is what happens when people are healing. They're transitioning out of that duality into the conscious state, and they may get triggered or knocked back into the dualities. And this is where, people get have setbacks, and they, if they have the wrong diet, they'll just give up and be defeated. Okay. So, so I'll just skip through a bit more. So these ones occur on the lower mind, and these ones are occurring on the higher mind. Those of you that know the book will understand. So this is positive psychology. The green ones are within duality. That's positive psychology. That's what I started with until I was from when I was 17 to 19. And when I understood the nature of the breath, that's when it all shifted into the spiritual psychology, where there was a relationship with the breath and the source of the breath and the source of the heartbeat as it went on. And then it went to the source of the cells and So like I said, if I do plant medicines, and I'm now looking at the subatomic particles and how they're structured to carry the information into creation from the Om, right? So it gets into all the very subtle and powerful things. So this is the chart that I share with everybody. I just became aware of the time, but this is what I want everybody to read and get their heads and hearts around. There's a bit of reading involved, but once you get your head and heart around it, every single thing a person thinks, says, or does, you'll be able to identify it, right? If somebody says, I just had an argument with my mum, right, and it made me really angry and so on, you'll be able to interpret what energies are at play and what thoughts that whole that interaction that they had with their mum has resulted in, and what it's reflecting in their thoughts, right? So I might go into that because you can have a read of that in your own time, but I want to explain the subtleties of things which I haven't shared with many people so far. So mindfulness, a lot of people crap on about this without understanding what it really means. And again, having spent time with these masters who were brutally honest, and they said, sit down, shut up and be quiet until you're aware of the origin of every outward going thought and the source of every inward coming thought, right? So all the inward coming thoughts and the divine other ones, you eventually become the source of them, right? Again, where do you think the breath is coming from? Where's the heartbeat coming from? There's an intelligence beyond your limited form that's expressing itself in and through you as the breath and the heartbeat, right? So when your consciousness goes back to the source of where that's coming from, right? The next level's up from when you're doing your intuitive process at the end of each night, where you're sending all the intuitions back to yourself. You're going down through the levels of manifestation where you become the source of that and sending the experience back to yourself, so you can have the celebration of sharing in the experience with others, right? So you must be aware of the origin of every outward going thought and the source of every inward coming thought. Your thoughts are determined by your vibrational state, which results from the dominant force or forces in your overall state and condition, which is, again, the dodec angle reflects your mental state and your physical condition. So that's why it's essential that you stay balanced and understand how all the different aspects interact, right? So when you look at it, again, like I treat a lot of people who are suicidal, this is from the homeopathic repertory. This is where, if you look at how, if somebody's suicidal, it sounds a bit heartless, but I say, if you were to kill yourself, how would you do it? And this is 200 odd years old, right? So if somebody says, they'll jump out of a window, then you look down here and it says throwing themselves from a height. And you can see there's anacardium, which is snake venom, silver nitrate, or I think nitrate, arsenic, gold poisoning, belladonna. So you can see this is all in Latin. So you can actually see what chemicals result in that mental emotional state, right? And if a lot of women get suicidal when they're having their periods, right? So they get suicidal, and when you look here, it says when they're having their menses, which is period, menstruation, right? So it's mercury poisoning, excess, and it's silica deficiency, right? So they knew all this sort of thing 200 years ago, but it's all been suppressed. And here, if somebody wants to hang themselves, there's arsenic poisoning, belladonna poisoning, sodium sulfate deficiency, and I can't quite remember what that one is, yeah? So do you see what I mean? It's all an excess or a lack of, which is reflecting the extreme mental emotional state, right? To the point where they'll terminate themselves, yeah? So I'll just quickly touch on this bit. I talk about a lot about the neurological side of things, but how people can and can't change their views is to do with the vestibular system, right? A lot of people get car sick and that sort of stuff, or they can't look over a building. It's all to do with the balance mechanism in the ear. That's what's actually stopping people from changing their points of view, right? It's not, don't make it personal. It's just, if somebody can't change their, like say for example, I had a conversation with somebody and I was trying to explain the top-down, bottom-up connection. And, you know, the conversation just didn't go well. And so then I went for a walk down to the park afterwards and I thought, oh my God, this is because this part of their vestibular system, it's called the saccule, the up and down movement part of the vestibular. You've got this balance mechanism in both sides of your brain, in the ear, right? It's the internal ear. I realized, oh my God, the person I was talking to has got a problem with their saccule, which means I'd have a fear of heights. So I rang them back and I said, I was just curious, do you have a fear of heights? And they go, shit, yeah, I can't even get up on a step ladder to go clean the gutters out, you know? So there was no point me talking about a top-down experience if they were neurologically limited, right, or blocked from having a top-down communication, right? So I'm going to talk about all the metaphysical relationships of how the vestibular system reflects in our mental emotional state and our capacity to learn and everything. This is everything I do on the brain exercise program, right? And like, to give you an example, I treated somebody there recently and, you know, I do a neurological test and I've worked out exactly, you know, what each head movement, you know, all that sort of stuff, what they can and can't do. And I said to this girl, she was doing the test, and as soon as I got her to turn her head to the right, she completely lost coordination. And she laughed because she'd done everything really good up to that moment. She goes, oh my God, right? I just completely stuffed up then, didn't I? I said, yeah. And I said, it's good that you picked up on it. She was very tuned in. And I said, so just because I've analysed and worked out what that actually means, that means that you have a lot of issues around time. But you're always late, you haven't, and she looked at me with this blank face and she goes, I have no sense of time at all, right? So that's what I'm saying. I've pinpointed how our neurology affects our ability to function, and how that reflects in our attitudes and behaviors, which then reflects in our thoughts, right? So I talk a lot about the primitive reflexes and neonatal responses. I won't go into that tonight. All this, I'll skip about all this because, sorry, I'll just skip all this. I just wanted to get to this part before. Okay, so this is what I want to share. This is what I haven't shared with many people. I won't keep going too long tonight. So, you know, if I put my hand up like this and then start doing this, right, you might catch yourself thinking, what's he doing? Why is he doing that? Right? So if I start doing this, your mind will be telling you something, right? I want you to become very aware of what happens, right? So, you know, if I said to you, now think of petals sitting here or lying here asleep on my lap, right? Your thoughts reflect immediately where I'm steering your attention to, right? Just so as you know, I've covered this before. If I focus my finger like this, keeping my head still and just track it with my eyes, that's concentration. Whereas if you were to actually move your finger and get me to keep my head still and track it with my eyes, that's me externally paying attention. So concentration is internal, attention is externally focused, right? So if I direct your attention to imagining petals curled up here on my lap, right? Your thoughts are imaginings, right? One of the origins of thoughts is imaginings, right? So you're imagining that, right? But I want you to actually become aware of the internal dialogue, the monologue that's going on as you're thinking to, oh yeah, she'd be really cute. You know, I can imagine curled up there and purring, and you know, you'd be saying something to yourself. This is what I want you to become very aware of, right? So if you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, an internal monologue is this. If you're about to do something, or I'm going to pick this up now. I better change my left hand to my right hand because I need to open the door with my left hand. And so you're actually narrating to yourself what you're doing in the now. Or, maybe I should do this now before I do that, because in the future I need to do that after I've done that, right? So this is where you're talking to yourself, right? This is the monologue that's going on, right? But then if you have an internal dialogue, right? Internal dialogue's between you and another person. So if I think back about, the last time I spoke to somebody, and if I was in a dualistic state, I'm going, that person really pissed me off when they said that, and I should have said that to retaliate, in response to what they said to me. I should have said this, next time I'll say that. So I'm talking to myself about to that person. I'm saying, then I'm thinking, I'm going to say this to them. And then, so you can do that either in relation to the past, or you might be rehearsing a conversation in the future. And you've got this dialogue going on between you and the person. So if I say this, they're going to say that. And then I'm going to counter that by saying this. So there's an internal monologue when you're talking to yourself. And if you do something like lock your keys in your car or something, you go, God, I'm stupid, I always do this. No, this is what I want you to become very aware of. And they're the moments where you need to catch it and return all that energy back to the breath. Yeah. And this is where, I was talking to somebody again today about how they need to do the Wim Hof thing, because they're in a critical, like I said, they're in a critical health situation and they need the Wim Hof thing to help them get out of it. And I'd already taught them the breath earlier in the year. And I said, the Wim Hof breathing is when you get into a life and death critical situation. It helps you cope and deal with the extremes of shock and trauma. Right? But my techniques, the Adada meditation material, it's to prevent you from even getting into that situation where you don't compromise, contradict, or deny yourself, where you don't override your intuitions and don't get yourself into the situation where you have to apply the Wim Hof stuff, right? That's all good, but it's only a remedy to the problem. What I'm sharing is to avoid that in the first place, to nip it in the bud, to keep yourself in the flow so you don't have to put your body through any shock or trauma to snap yourself into a different state, right? So when you look at the patterns and the momentum or the dodic angle, the number of energies going outwards, it's really hard for a lot of people to find the internal silence, to silence that internal monologue and the internal dialogue. Right, so that's where it's good to go for a sprint up a hill. If you don't do anything without medical approval, but like if you're stagnant, go for a bit of a jog. Get to the point where you can sprint up a flight of stairs. You need to diversify the activities within your body. Right, do the Wim Hof thing just to snap yourself out of a stagnant state or something. And you will notice that, if you got a printout of your thoughts as you're doing a Wim Hof thing, ice bath or something. Or, if you're, like a person who's doing music and you're in the flow, just playing a musical instrument. Like if you've got a printout of your thoughts, that's what I'm consciously talking about, is how to determine what your thoughts are and the direction they're going. And if they kept going in that direction, what's the result going to be if they're dualistic? And if they're kept flowing in the divine perspective, what's that divine outcome going to be? It's going to go one of two ways, deeper into duality or further into divinity. It's one or the other. And if you become very aware of the internal monologue and dialogue that's going on in the now, and if you, like I talk about in the universal method, if you amplify the dualistic, what's the result? And if you magnify the divine, what's the outcome, right? So I'll just see what else I had here. So that's pretty well it. That's what I was going to talk about, yeah? So I might leave you the information at that. So were there any questions or comments in relation to that? I hope, again, I say and share all this knowing that people can watch it 10 times if they need to, yeah? And if you want to get the full story, read my book. Otherwise, if you want to apply it in a practical way, that's what the Adada meditation is all about, is how to apply this in a very practical way at the different stages that you go through when you're going into that meditative state and becoming aware of how to apply the 6 facilitation exercises to intensify the shifting in your energies, yeah? and then knowing how to use the breath and the heartbeat to stay anchored in that state once you're there. Yeah. So, any questions or comments? Any feedback there, Mark?
Nothing. Actually, Bridget's just. Are you going to keep screen sharing, or do you want to jump out?
Oh no, I'll stop that. Yeah.
Yep. So Bridget's just made a comment. Tonight's been totally illuminating. Thank you. Had a few penny drop moments. That's great. Helen, this is awesome. Thank you. I've learned a lot. You do say that you work well on Wednesdays, Brian. You're definitely on point tonight. That's flowed really well, actually. So,
and that's on minimal sleep, I can tell you. So, yeah, I had all sorts of interruptions today. Normally, I have my afternoon siesta, but I definitely did not have that the last few days. So, yeah, we're still unpacking. If I panned my camera around, you'd see what state my office is in at the moment. Got a lot of work ahead, but that's all been good. Yeah, but I'm glad everybody, or hopefully everybody enjoyed that. But like, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You know, as you can see that, you know, all the holographic diagrams I talk about, I can keep going into each component of that to any depth. Yeah. And this is what I like to share with people before they do plant medicines. Like if you, again, I've got the charts back on my wall and they're on the wall behind Mark as well. If you understand the nature and origins of your thoughts, you'll be able to navigate your way within consciousness, right? Not just when you're doing plant medicines, but when you're doing what I call the ritual of eating, where you are what you think while you eat. And that's the point where it all starts and stops for everybody, right? So you'll get a good hard look at where your thought processes are at, like what laws you're violating or living in harmony with, and how that reflects in the dynamics of the thought processes that you're having, right? There's no other way of empowering yourself until you're actually aware that your thoughts are your thoughts, and knowing what's triggering them and what's pulling them away from what I call the state of grace. You know. So
yeah,
did you
have
anything to add to that, Mark?
No, it's all great. I was just going to make mention. It's even funnier when you're sharing a house with someone that's aware of it as well, and then it just becomes funny when you're picking up on each other's thought projections and mind readings about what to have for dinner and all those little subtle things. It just becomes hilarious. But
yeah, it is.
So
the reason why it's hilarious is because when you share something, it magnifies the essence of it. That's why I use the word magnificence. It magnifies the essence of it when it's shared. And when it's conscious and deliberate, it just keeps magnifying, which is the true nature of things, which is the evolution. Yeah.
Beautiful. Just go back in amongst all the wonderful thank you messages. Thanks, everyone. Jenny has written, hey, Brian, so with regard to caffeine, does that mean cacao also? Is that an F?
Again, it's medicine, right? Only use it if you're, if you're needing it. One of my friends one day was out in the garden and she overrode all her intuitions and didn't stop gardening, and she was in the heat of the day. I said, the thing you need to do now is have a coffee. And she goes, oh, but you told me coffee's bad. And I said, yeah, but so's working 3 hours in the middle of a Gold Coast, summer day doing gardening. Yeah. So the remedy is coffee. It's all medicine. So again, some people can handle the caffeine within the cacao. Some people can't. I'm one of the people who can, if I don't have it too late in the day. Yeah. So again, there's no standard answer because everything's appropriate when it's appropriate. And this is where I just have to say to people, you'll have to wait for my book where I talk about the 3,456 energies and properties of foods to be written. I'm going to go all out. I'm going to explain the whole picture. So that way it'll be self-evident to everybody. Yeah, but that'll come. Yeah.
Depends if it's all mixed up in a what's his supersonic tonic, Brian.
Yeah, just so as everybody knows the joke. I've got when I was in India, everyone called me Kitchu. So I've got Kitchu's Mega Super Smoothie, which has got about 60 ingredients, and Mark's got a what do you call it? A what's his?
Oh, what's his supersonic? What's he tonic or something like that?
Yeah, like he's got this fantastic thing where he puts all the mushrooms and everything in it. So anyway.
All good fun. Esther and William have commented, breath, heartbeat, cellular memory. How does this go parallel to time, space, and space-time again?
Okay. So the breath is your intuition, which is your future self on the higher mind level. The heartbeat is your higher self, and that's still occurring within time and space. Like if you look at the 5 purple ones, like from 13 to 17, right? They're beings. That's 2 separate beings. I skipped over this bit, but I talk about the 6 degrees of communication, which is point A talking to point B talking back to point A, going backwards and forwards 6 times. That's all. That's occurring within and between the cells of your body, but it's also occurring within and between every being in every form. Like when you get into the subtleties of it, every cell in your body is communicating with every paint pigment on the wall. Right? It sounds a bit of a stretch, but somewhere all the forces within creation are being created, and eventually your intelligence, your awareness merges with that. Right? So that comes with a divine oneness experience. But in the process leading into that experience, you eventually become all your future higher selves. And like I said, at the end of each day, you have to honor that your present self is now what was your future self, right? And your present self now will eventually become your future's past self, right? So the communication within your timeline, this is on your timeline, the more you expand your awareness in both directions down your timeline, into your past and into your future, knowing that it's all inevitable, then your thoughts will stay in that flow coming from your future self. And that's gratitude. Remember, the gratitude is what connects that. Then you've got the gratefulness, which is gratefulness for everything present, everything past, and everything future yet to come. That takes you to the soul level, which is your higher self. And that's when all that information flows in as a form of inspiration to serve others in the fulfillment of their needs, right? Which is all essentially their nature, soul, and food. And that's nature, nurture, nourish. And then beyond that, you've got the heartbeat. That's the heartbeats on the soul levels. That's where you become connected to the heart. That's the I am within the session, the stillness, emptiness, silence, solitude, the I am. So your awareness of the heartbeat expands into everyone else's heartbeat, right? And then when you go into the cellular level, that's when you get into all the other dynamics. So that's where you honor the fact that everything that's occurring in everybody's life, despite appearances, means that they're in the flow towards emergence. Yeah. So when you get back to the oneness side of things, that's when that you're transcending time and space. You're actually transcending individuality to the point where you are all the higher beings. This is what I talk about in my next book, where you eventually become all those people sending the information back to yourself, right? But I won't give too much away about that because I'm going to explain it all in my next book. Yeah. So any other questions or comments? I might bring up the chats myself. I can see it here. So was there anything else that you saw of, Mark?
You had one there from Jono after Esther and Williams.
Okay, somebody's just asked the question, what are your thoughts, wisdom on serious nail biting? Well, again, any nervous twitches, like I talk about neurologically how everyone's got the same amount of energy. And if that energy is not being directed towards a flow of creativity, it turns destructive or it's expressed in all these involuntary movements. And this is when I act out a little kid who's full of ants, got ants in his pants, and he's going, and he can't sit still, and he's going, my dad, what's that up there? My friend Joey, he's got a dog. And, so all these involuntary movements. So serious nail biting is an involuntary thing. It's an expression of the energy that's not being channeled towards creativity. But when you look at the energies behind it, it's actually bacteria. It means your microbiome from mouth to anus is blown out. And the bacteria that you've got dominant in your microbiome is the bacteria that live under your nails, right? It's no different than a kid, picking their nose and eating it. It's just feeding into the microbiome that's the dominant force, yeah? So it's a bacterial imbalance, yeah? And the bacteria are robbing your body of the nutrients, which means that you're feeding them. It's like a person who's got golden staph in their system. They'll constantly crave chicken, right? Every microorganism has a craving, right? Every microorganism has a habit. Where, everybody knows if they're bugs out, you've got bugs, they've got an itchy bum or itchy ears or itchy nose, yeah? This is where it's those energies that are playing out as a nervous energy, because when you look at it, I didn't explain this, but when I was talking about the cellular replication of your body, when you get a biological infection, if you look at bacteria replicating under a microscope, their cellular replication is a lot faster than a human cell. So every time they communicate, and this is Professor Bonnie Bassler, she talks about how bacteria communicate, but they haven't yet worked out that all microorganisms and all parasites and worms and fungus and everything like that talk to each other. She's talking about just the different species of bacteria, right? All microorganisms talk to each other using a different communication network. But they're communicating on these levels that I just talked about. So they're hijacking your levels of communication to coordinate their own environment, right? To perpetuate their reality. And when you know how to do the probiotic flush, take probiotics and things like that, olive leaf extract. I'm going to do a talk about this very soon. Now that I've got a super fast computer now, internet connection. So you may have noticed on a lot of the videos in the past, my voice wasn't syncing with the sound. It's because I had a really bad internet connection. So yeah, I'm going to explain more about the microbiome and the whole detoxification process as well. So yeah, so what was Jono's question, Mark?
He says, you talk about being around your 5 best people as much as possible. I am now a carer for a highly toxic person who smokes a lot and drinks and has intrusive thoughts. How does this affect my effectiveness in being connected to my higher future self?
Total compromise. Like you can't be around people who are compromised. Like this is the main thing I've explained to a lot of people. A lot of people say, I love this person, I'm sacrificing them, I want to stand by them and all that sort of stuff. But, if you're compromising yourself, then it's no longer sacrifice, right? You have to sacrifice up to the point you compromise. If you're compromised and it's causing your thoughts to be disturbed, like I said, it's the first alarm bell to go off is that you start having outward going thoughts on something, right? If something triggers you to have outward going thoughts, you have to be very brutally honest with yourself and say, I'm not strong enough or clear enough within myself to maintain a state of grace where I'm responding from stillness, emptiness, and silence. Even though I may be containing my reactions internally, right? Then that's when I deal with people who've got brain tumors and all that sort of stuff, they're internalizing their reaction to the point where, they do the heading, with brain tumors, right? So this is impacting on your lymph, blood, nerves, meridians, and chakras immediately, right? So if I said to everybody steak or car bomb, right, you'll feel your energies contract. If I say petals or butterfly, right, you might feel your energies expand. If you're around people who compromise, contradict, or deny you and keep your energies like a series of bombarding your energies and you're contracting, you need to draw your sword, yeah? So, yeah. So, yeah, there's no compromise, contradiction, or denial, Jono. So I just see there's another question.
There's 2 there. So the first one, someone wrote, rather than nail biting, it was how about nail picking, picking the nails off so there's nothing left to cut.
That's probably, again, it's a combination of microorganisms, but that's more of a lack of silica due to being other bugs robbing you of the nutrients. So you need lots and lots of silica, but at the same time you need lots of high sulfur. Anybody who's got bugs in their system needs to have all the high sulfur foods. But again, without that's a general thing. I'm going to do a video where I explain the 10 steps to detoxification and energization, and the 7 cycles in a 2-year period. That's coming up soon. So, and then somebody's asked me, Brian, any guidance on benign fibroids in the womb? How is it likely to affect mental? All right, so that's a good topic. Metaphysically, the reproductive organs are to do with the creative energies. You know, that's what reproduction is all about. Reproduction is about the creative cycle. And if somebody's got benign fibroids, that's unresolved conflict or confusion, either with yourself or others. And it's the game. If you're not directing all your energy in a creative way, it turns destructive. And if that energy is not purely finding, like the term is self-forgetfulness. If you're not finding that state of self-forgetfulness in the flow of your creativity, whether it's music, song, dance, whatever, then, or art, any form of art or any activity, then that energy the energy's got to go somewhere. Like I said, you know, this kid who's acting, the energy's just going off in all these different tangents. But when you're clear and connected, then all the energy returns. I mean, the best example of all that is, if you don't know Brandon Bayes, you need to look at Brandon Bayes' The Journey. She's the best person to look into that. But I take it a step further with all the universal method as well. But if you get your head around that, it's just undirected energy. Everyone's got the same amount of energy. It's either being creative or destructive in each moment. You have to be aware of that. So was there anything else?
No further questions there in the chat box, unless anyone's got one they want to come on and ask, or pop it in the chat box. Now's your opportunity.
How any guidance on how to redirect creative energy? Yeah, that's finding the fun factor. That's what I talked about previously in the 6 soul elements, and doing the 7 great lists ties off the loose ends, and the 6 soul elements puts you onto your creative path. Yeah, you have to redirect it towards the things that are the most fun and creative and spontaneous things. Yeah. I talk about that in the other videos, as well as the book, obviously. So Helen's asking, when am I coming back to Adelaide? As soon as the lockdown's over, I'm out of here. I'm going to hit the road. I'm going to continue what I call my tour of duties. Yeah. So
you might need a tank in the meantime to get through the barricades.
Oh yeah. So when will you do the detox protocols? I really need to clear up my system. Yeah, we can do a one-on-one anytime, but I don't know. Like, I'll do it as soon as I get everything set up with the Zoom, and whether, you know, I use Mark because he's got the system set up, and, you know, he takes care of things that I don't want to do. But, you know, now that I'm set up with a better internet speed and everything like that, I can do a lot of it myself, and I'll be doing more videos where I either shoot the camera with a whiteboard, or I'll be doing just sharing the screen similar to what I was doing before. I've got an enormous amount of information I'll be sharing. If I get enough funds to keep me going, I'll do it. Yeah.
Speaking of, I'll pop a little link in the chat box in a sec for anyone that's listening tonight and feels it appropriate to make Brian a donation to cover his bond and his move, and keep him going so he can share these wonderful calls.
The less I have to work, the more creative I can be in writing, and the more I can get this out to people. Like I said, I'm trying to step away from the clinical practice side of things. Just like, you know, if I spend 4 hours with one person who's suicidal, I could have finished my next book in that time. You know, I could reach 1 million people in that time. Yeah. So I'm trying to, you know, use my time effectively. Yeah.
Maybe just one thing to add there to Jenny asking about the detoxing and getting things going.
Yeah.
Probably important to note that there's specific times of year where it's appropriate, and depending where she is, it may not be time to jump into a detox, but can perhaps go into the energizing and the other stages beforehand.
I'll talk about it another time, but there's 10 steps in it, and you go through those 10 steps in 7 cycles in a 2-year period. You have to time it to the point where you're not doing the detox part either in the middle of summer or winter. You don't do a detox when you've got sweat on your brow or socks on your feet. You can do it if you've got enough support and you're in the right environment, but usually not. Yeah. If something is fun, it's all good, right? The more fun, the better, especially if it's questioning authority. Jono, we don't have to have that conversation. I said it's got nothing to do with you, what's going on in the world. Just mind your own business, get creative and have fun as if no one else exists on the planet. You keep slipping down that rabbit hole. You know, it's no longer appropriate for you. Yeah. So, like I said, you're still resisting them with your thoughts. Just ignore them and walk away. Yeah. Anything else?
Esther and William have asked, what is the internal dialogue pointing to?
The internal dialogue. Well, the internal dialogue means that, you know, if you're sitting there having this conversation within yourself, your energies are split. Like I said, you've got 2 points going backwards and forwards. Yeah. So if you're split within time and space within yourself, if you're talking to your past self or your future self, you're not fully present. Yeah. So it means that you're not in a state of self-forgetfulness in the moment, being creative and having fun, right? And the internal dialogue will be, I'm doing this now, not I should have done this in the past or I could do this in the future. It's I'm here now, right? So it means that you're not present within the breath. It means that you haven't done enough purification and elimination of everything that's pulling your energies away from being present. Yeah. So it's just everything's tempting you to go outside of the here and now. That's why the ritual of eating is so important, because if you can't stay connected to the breath and heartbeat the whole time you eat, right, you're not going to be present while you're doing everything else, right? Because you're going to be influenced by it and your energies are going to go out and get caught up in it like a hamster wheel again. Is there a divine aspect to that? Divine aspect to which one, Erica?
Yeah, that's why I had my hand up, because I'm on the phone and it would take me way too long to.
Sorry, I didn't see it up there. I wasn't scrolled up to the top. Sorry, Erica.
It's okay. So I definitely have the dualistic internal dialogue going on, but there are times when I have a question that I would ask you, and I end up having the conversation within myself purely with your voice, but I get the answer.
Sorry, just say that again. You hear the voice.
I'm basically imagining that I'm having the conversation with you, but it's within me. It's in the internal dialogue, and I actually get to an outcome.
But that's what I'm saying, Erica. You don't need me to tell you anything. Your future higher self will tell you everything you need to know.
Is that what that is? That I'm hearing your voice, but it is my future higher self telling me.
Oh, I see what you mean. Well, possibly, but then you don't need it to be outside of yourself. That's what I'm saying. When you get to the point of divine oneness, you've all the guidance, all the external information coming to you. Again, all those 18 origins of thoughts, except for the divine oneness one, is a flow of information between 2 or more forms. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when you get back to the divine oneness, you're just whole and complete within yourself. You're able to be all that you are. You're here doing all that you need to do. And then as you're going about it, the divine gives you the divine parts, the green ones, tells you go and do this, go and do that. Yeah. So you're literally minding your own business, getting on with it. Yeah. So in that sense, like if you're, the question, if those of you that know the material, you can actually pinpoint exactly where Erica's missing the point, right? Because she's not doing it with a state of gratitude. She's doing it in the effort to become, rather than the state of gratitude in the beingness of it and having it come to her. So she's still in the state of duality. So she's questioning, is this appropriate or not? Whereas when you're in a state of gratitude, you're not questioning whether it's appropriate or not, or its nature, because it goes with, it's self-evident.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So again, a lot of people, we've talked about this in the past, right? When you're in a state of gratitude, it's obvious. Like you can't fake going wow when you see a beautiful sunset, right? I saw a most beautiful sunset there today. You can't fake being in awe of that, right? So when you're in awe of the moment of you being you, You don't question, you don't have to question now, is my future higher self, Brian, talking back to me or whatever? It's just, it's obvious. The information's there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yep.
So again, gratitude is the light that comes on that helps you understand your relationship within time and space between everybody and everything. That's what helps you connect. Through your connection, you expand that connection towards everything and everyone else. And the more you're connected, the more you're able to identify where the information's coming from, and it's occurring as your thoughts, yeah? So that's why, you know, I've talked about a little bit in the book, you know, when all the masters were appearing to me, you know, some people must have thought I was going crazy because I was having all these thoughts that weren't mine, but I knew shit that just there's no way I could possibly have known, yeah? Does that make sense? But all of that's appropriate at the different stages of life. And, you know, at the different, you know, this is where all the different stages as you evolve within the aspects and facets. Yeah.
So having moments of...
So what you're talking about, it also relates to, Erica, to the lack of light in your life at the moment, right? So when you've got enough of the 18 seeds of light, right, you can see it for what it is, right? So you're still taking things too personally and seriously. You're not eating with a smile on your face. You're not doing the intuitive process in the morning and the evening with a smile on your face. Yeah, because that brings in the light and the essence of it. So when you're in that essence, you're not questioning things.
And is that why I am not in a constant state of gratitude, and I just have moments of it, but not continuous?
Well, yeah, you know the material enough for me to be able to say to you, it's not gratitude, it's gratefulness, right? So you don't put anything in your mouth until you're grateful for everything past, present, and future. And you don't finish eating, you don't get up from the table until you actually have gratefulness for everything past, present, and future. Right? That's where you're at. Yeah? If you're still stuck at gratitude and not gratefulness, then there won't be the light of inspiration guiding you forward in the way you need it. Yeah. Like you have to constantly evolve by going deeper into the gratefulness. Like, okay, you've got mindfulness of the breath and the heartbeat. That leads to gratefulness. That leads to self-forgetfulness within the 6 soul elements. That leads to playfulness. That leads to joyfulness. And that leads to the gracefulness of it all. So it's all full. It's all saturation and immersion. Yeah. And that's what you haven't yet tapped into. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
You have to honor yourself just by doing those simple little rituals and, you know, the process, do the intuitive process. Yeah.
Cool.
Clear?
Yes. Thank you.
Good. Any other questions or comments come up then?
No more in that time, no.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's a wrap, everybody. I have to show everybody Petals again. She's so cute the way she curls up into a ball here.
Oh, sorry. Jenny.
She's so hot.
Sorry,
say
Jenny.
Say bye, everyone.
Hey, Petals. Jenny again. I had one. I find that when I'm here and now doing everything in the moment, that's when I lose track of time. I have little concept of time and being on time.
Yeah. So again, remember, if you're looking into the metaphysics of it, the wood, fire, earth, metal, water, and ether, and so on. The lungs is the air element. So this is relating to the when. So again, when you're aware of the here and now, that keeps you connected to when, right? If you're aware of each phase of each breath, then you're here and now. Yeah. So you're following all the intuitions in the moment. Yeah. So.
Oh, look at Petals. Kiss, kiss.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think if there's no other questions, we'll call that a night. And yeah. So, well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to share that all with you. And I'm so happy to be here with my little mascot again. So, yeah. Thanks again, awesome. Mark.
No, I appreciate it. It was wonderful to be back online. And thanks very much for all of that as usual. And thanks, everyone, for being here. And yeah, I think we've I've got a trip up visiting my folks and so forth this weekend, but I'm sure we'll be in touch, and we'll organise the next one very, very soon.
Yep.
We're starting to build a list of topics again. So, and if anyone does, have their head and heart around all parts, some of like Brian's material, and they know what he's got to share, if there's a topic you'd like to speak about, just whether reach out to Brian on his MeWe comment there, send him an email, and we're compiling a list of things to talk about. If there's something you really like us to cover, by all means, please send us some suggestions.
Yeah, so just on that note, I probably won't go into too much detail of anything that I'm going to be covering in the future books, because there's so much material yet to come. I'd rather just expand on or make practical what I've already covered or what I've already presented. So there's we've got a list of things we can talk about, but I want to try to bring in as much of the new material as I can, but I don't want it to go over people's heads that don't already have the foundation of what we've presented already. So yeah, so but plenty more to come. Like now that I've got this is my office. I've got another room downstairs, which is my clinic and studio. So I've got to make that into a video studio where I do lots of videos and that sort of thing as well as work from this office as well. So so plenty more to come. It's going to be bloody good fun, actually. So yeah, especially now I've got pedals back with me. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
Right, well,
All right.
Finish up the recording there, I think, and say good night to everyone. But
all right, good night, everyone. Thanks again.